5 Apache widows knocked at his door, and the rancher was never the same again. The sun was slowly sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind whispered across the dry grass, carrying the faint smell of earth and smoke from distant fires. On the outskirts of the frontier, where the land stretched wide and lonely, a rancher named Daniel lived in a small, weathered cabin. Life on the ranch had always been hard. Every day meant waking early, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and making sure the land survived the harshness of the frontier. Daniel had learned long ago that the world was unforgiving, and he had become used to the silence that surrounded him. The quiet comforted him, though it sometimes felt heavy, like the weight of the sky pressing down. He had no family left. His parents had died when he was young, and he had never married. The neighbors were few and they lived far apart, each struggling with their own lives. Daniel had grown accustomed to the loneliness. Some nights he would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the horizon, listening to the wind and thinking about nothing at all. It was a life of routine and solitude, but it was the life he knew. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the first stars began to appear in the deepening sky, Daniel was finishing his work in the barn. The horses had been fed, the cattle checked, and the fences repaired. He wiped his hands on his pants and was about to head inside for supper when he heard a sound that made him stop. It was a faint tapping at the door of his cabin. At first, he thought it might be the wind rattling the wood. But then he heard it again. Slow, deliberate, almost timid. Curiosity and caution filled him. Visitors were rare in these parts, especially at this hour. He walked to the door, rested his hand on the handle, and looked through the small window. What he saw made him step back in surprise. There were 5 women standing there. They were dirty and worn, their clothes torn and patched, their faces lined with fatigue. Each carried a small bundle, probably all they owned. Daniel's first instinct was to wonder how they had survived the journey through the rough terrain. Their eyes met his through the window. There was a mixture of fear, hope, and something unspoken that made Daniel's heart tighten. These were not women who had come for entertainment or casual conversation. They had come out of necessity, driven by circumstances he could only imagine. Their stance was hesitant. They did not push the door or demand entry. They simply waited, as if they knew that the decision to let them in rested with him. Daniel opened the door slowly. "Evening," he said, keeping his voice steady though his mind raced. "Can I help you?" The tallest of the women stepped forward. She spoke softly, in a voice that carried both weariness and quiet strength. "Sir, we mean no trouble. We need shelter, please." Her words were simple, yet Daniel felt the weight of everything behind them: loss, fear, and exhaustion. He hesitated. Taking strangers in could be dangerous. The frontier was not always kind to those who offered help. Stories of robberies and betrayal were not uncommon. But there was something in their eyes that made him pause. They were not dangerous, they were desperate. And in that moment he realized that refusing them would be cruelty, a choice he could not make. "All right," he said finally. "Come in." He stepped aside, and the women entered cautiously. The cabin was small and plain. The walls were lined with rough wood and the furniture was simple and functional. Daniel led them to the main room, offering the only chairs he had. The women sat, their eyes taking in the cabin, the fire and the stove, the small kitchen. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Where are you from?" Daniel asked, trying to keep the conversation gentle. He did not want to pry too much. knowing that they might have suffered things too painful to speak aloud. The woman who had spoken first looked down at her hands, then slowly lifted her gaze. We come from the land to the west," she said. "Our husbands, they were killed. Our homes destroyed. We have nowhere else to go." Her voice trembled, but there was no sobbing, no dramatic display of grief. It was quiet, controlled, and yet it carried the depth of sorrow that only those who have lost everything can feel. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood loss. He had lived long enough to see friends and neighbors leave the world in ways that left silence behind. But seeing it reflected in these women, in their eyes, made the reality sharp and immediate. He felt an unusual sense of responsibility. These women were not only asking for shelter, they were asking for safety, for human kindness, for the chance to breathe again. He led them to a corner of the cabin where he had space for beds made of straw and blankets. It was modest, not much, but it was warmth and protection. "You can rest here for the night," he said. "I'll get you something to eat." The women nodded, gratitude flickering across their faces, but it was not a desperate or demanding gratitude. It was simple, human, and it touched something deep inside Daniel. While they settled in, he went to the small pantry. There was not much. Some bread, dried meat, and a few cans of preserved vegetables, but it would suffice. He set the food before them, and they ate quietly, each lost in our own thoughts, yet sharing the same space in an unspoken bond. After they had eaten, Daniel sat across from them by the fire. He watched them carefully, noting the way they moved, the way they spoke softly among themselves in a language he did not fully understand. They were strangers, yet they carried the air of people who had been through much and survived. There was pride in their posture, even in their exhaustion, and that pride made him respect them instantly. The tallest woman, who seemed to be their leader, spoke again. We are grateful, sir. You do not know how much this means." Her voice was calm, steady, and yet Daniel could hear the layers of emotion beneath it. She did not beg. She simply acknowledged the kindness that had been extended to her and her companions. Daniel nodded. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "It's just the right thing to do. No one should be left out in the cold, not in a place like this." As the evening deepened, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows and doors. But inside the cabin there was a strange warmth, a warmth that came not from the fire, but from the presence of life and resilience. Daniel watched as the women made themselves a little comfortable, quietly arranging their small belongings, murmuring softly to one another. He realized that for the first time in a long while, his home was filled with more than just silence. The night grew darker, and Daniel knew that sleep would not come easily. He could feel a change within himself, a shift he did not fully understand yet. These women, with their quiet strength and sorrow, had stirred something long dormant in him. Compassion, empathy, a sense of connection. The frontier had taught him to be wary, to survive alone. But this unexpected encounter reminded him that life was more than survival. It was also about helping, about sharing, about recognizing the humanity in others. As he finally lay down on his own cot, he could hear the soft breathing of the women as they slept. The wind continued to whistle outside, but inside, the cabin felt alive. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he did not feel entirely alone. The knock at his door had been more than a call for help. It had been the beginning of a change he could not yet name, a change that would ripple through his life in ways he could not predict. And so, the rancher who had known only solitude and routine found himself on the edge of something new. The night stretched long, full of quiet possibilities, And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, felt the stirring of hope. Hope that life, even in the harsh frontier, could bring unexpected connections, and perhaps even healing. The morning after the 5 women arrived, the ranch looked different. The air felt quieter, but in a strange way, it was not empty anymore. The women had moved slowly, like people who were still unsure if the shelter was real. They washed their faces with water from a bucket, and then they sat together in the corner talking in soft voices. Their language sounded like music, even if Daniel did not understand it. There was something about the way they spoke to each other that showed respect and care. Daniel watched them for a while before he stepped outside. He wanted to give them space, but he also knew that he needed to understand who they were. He had to know their stories, not just because he was curious, but because he wanted to make sure he could help them in the best way possible. The women stayed close to each other, like a small family. They looked tired, but they also looked proud. They were not asking for pity. They had already been through too much for pity to matter. They needed shelter, yes, but they also needed dignity. Daniel prepared breakfast. He made coffee and heated some bread. The smell of food filled the cabin, and for a moment, the women's faces showed relief. Food was not just a meal. It was a sign that life could continue. They ate slowly, and Daniel noticed how they shared everything carefully, as if they were used to making small resources last a long time. After breakfast, Daniel spoke to the tallest woman again. He wanted to know more about them. "You said your husbands are gone," he said gently. "What happened to them?" The woman looked down, then up again. Her eyes were calm but full of sadness. "There was fighting," she said. "Our village was attacked. Many people were hurt. Our husbands tried to protect us. They were brave, but the world is not always fair." She paused, and Daniel could see the pain in her face. "We escaped. We ran. We came here because we had no place else." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He did not know the details, but he understood the meaning. He could imagine the fear, the running, the feeling of losing everything. He wanted to ask more, but he did not want to make her relive the pain. So he asked in a different way. "Did you have children?" he asked softly. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "Some did," she said. "Some were too young to remember. But we lost many. It was too much." She looked down again, her hands trembling slightly. "We are widows. We are all alone." Daniel nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. He did not know what else to say. He had heard stories of loss before, but hearing it from someone living it made the pain feel real. He realized that these women were not just people in need. They were survivors. They had endured more than most people could imagine. The other women listened quietly. They did not interrupt. Their eyes were sad, but they also showed respect for the woman who spoke. Daniel realized that she was their leader, their voice. She spoke for them because she had to, and because she could. Daniel wanted to help them, but he also wondered what they would do next. How could he support them? He had a ranch, but he did not have much extra. The land was tough. The weather was harsh. There was no guarantee that anything would grow. And yet, he could not ignore them. He decided to ask them to help around the ranch, not because he wanted free work, but because he believed in dignity. He believed that people should not feel like they were only being taken care of. They should feel like they were part of something. So he asked gently, "If you want, you can help with small tasks. There is work to do and I could use the help. But you do not have to if you don't want to." The women looked at each other, and then the tallest woman nodded. "We will help," she said. "We are grateful. and we want to do something useful. We are not children. Over the next few days, the ranch began to change slowly. The women helped with simple tasks at first. They cleaned the cabin, gathered wood, and fed the chickens. They were careful and efficient. Their hands moved with skill, showing that they had lived with hard work all their lives. Daniel watched them with growing respect. They did not complain. They did not ask for more than they needed. They worked quietly, and they worked well. But even with the work, the women's sadness was always close to the surface. Sometimes, when they thought no one was watching, their eyes would stare into the distance. Daniel knew that they were remembering their past. Their minds were filled with memories that would not leave them easily. One day, while the women were outside gathering wood, Daniel walked over to the fence where they were sitting. He sat beside them quietly, not interrupting their thoughts. After a while, he asked a question he had been thinking about. "What was your life like before this?" he asked. The tallest woman looked at him, and for a moment she seemed unsure. Then she spoke slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "Before, we had families. We had homes. We had stories. We had songs. We had celebrations." She smiled for a moment, but it was a small smile, like a light in a dark room. "We were not always sad. We were happy sometimes." Daniel listened closely. "What were your homes like?" he asked. The woman's eyes softened. "Our homes were simple, but they were full of life. We had fires, and we cooked together. We had children who laughed. We had elders who taught us. We had traditions. We were not alone." She paused, and her eyes became distant. Now, it feels like all of that is gone. Daniel could feel the weight of her words. He understood that their lives had been ripped apart. The pain was not only in the loss of people, but in the loss of a whole way of living. He realized that these women had not just lost their husbands, they had lost their entire world. As the days went on, Daniel learned more about each woman. They were not all the same. They had different personalities, different strengths, different fears. One woman was quiet and gentle. She rarely spoke, but her eyes were kind. She helped with the animals, and she seemed to have a natural connection with them. Daniel noticed that the animals responded to her calm energy. She reminded him of someone who had always been gentle and caring. Another woman was strong and stubborn. She did not want to be seen as weak. She worked hard, and she spoke with determination. She often took charge of tasks without being asked. Daniel admired her courage, but he also sensed that she was holding her pain tightly inside. A third woman was younger, with a softer face. She seemed frightened most of the time, but she also had a spark in her eyes. Daniel could tell that she had seen things she should not have seen. She would sometimes stare at the horizon, as if expecting something to appear. He wondered if she was waiting for someone who would never come. The fourth woman was older. Her hair was gray and her hands were worn. She seemed to have lived through many hardships already. She spoke less than the others, but when she did, her words carried wisdom. She often watched the others carefully, as if protecting them in a silent way. Daniel could tell that she was like a grandmother, even though she was not their actual relative. Daniel realized that each woman had a different way of coping. They had different strengths, and each one brought something important to the group. Together they formed a small community inside the cabin. They shared their food, their stories, and their quiet moments. They became more than strangers. But despite the new routine, Daniel could not ignore the outside world. The ranch was far from the town, but news traveled. People would notice if there were strangers living on his land. He knew that some neighbors might not approve. They might think he was taking a risk. They might even try to cause trouble. One evening, as the sun set, Daniel sat with the women by the fire. He spoke gently. "I know people might not understand," he said. "Some may not like that you are here," the tallest woman nodded. "We know," she said. "We do not want to cause trouble. We just want a safe place." Daniel sighed. "I will protect you," he said. "But you must also be careful. We will need to stay quiet and respectful. We cannot invite trouble." The women agreed. They understood. They had learned to be cautious. They had lived through danger, and they knew how fragile safety could be. As the night came, Daniel looked at the women and felt something shift inside him. He had always thought of his ranch as his own world, but now he saw it as something more. It was a place where people could start again. It was a place where life could be rebuilt, even after tragedy. The women had brought new life to his ranch, not just through their work, but through their presence. They had given him a new sense of purpose. He realized that he was no longer living just for himself. He was living to help others. That night, as the wind blew outside, Daniel lay on his cot and listened to the quiet breathing of the women. He knew their stories were not finished. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. But he also knew that the bond between them was growing stronger. He had opened his door to strangers, and now his life was changing in a way he could not ignore. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he felt something like hope. Not a bright, loud hope, but a quiet one. A hope that even in the harsh frontier, people could find a way to heal. A hope that the future could be different from the past. And as the night passed, the rancher understood that the lives of these 5 women were now tied to his own. Their stories were becoming his story too. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew that he could not turn back now. The days passed slowly on the ranch, but they were not empty anymore. The 5 women had become part of the daily rhythm, each one finding a role. The rancher Daniel found himself waking up earlier, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He watched the sunrise with a new sense of purpose. He no longer felt like a man living alone. The cabin was filled with quiet activity, small sounds of life. It was not a large household, but it was real. The women worked hard. They tended the small garden that Daniel had planted near the cabin, even though the soil was tough and dry. They learned how to care for the animals, and they worked with the horses. Some of them were gentle with the animals, and the animals seemed to sense that. The ranch slowly became more organized, more alive. Daniel was surprised by how much they knew. They had skills that he had not expected. They could sew, mend, cook, and even help with the land. They made the cabin feel more like a home. The women laughed sometimes, small laughs that broke the silence. The laughter was not loud, but it was real. It showed that they were beginning to heal. One morning, Daniel woke to find one of the women standing by the window, looking out. She seemed worried. He walked over quietly and asked, "What's on your mind?" She turned to him slowly. "I saw something," she said. "In the distance. People." Daniel's heart tightened. "Who?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. But they were walking. There were several of them. They looked like they were coming this way." Daniel felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had known this might happen. The ranch was not hidden. People traveled through the area, and now, with strangers living there, it was possible that others would notice. He thanked the woman and tried to stay calm. "We need to be careful," he said. "If they come here, we will greet them politely. We will not cause trouble. But we must be ready." The women nodded. They had lived through danger before, and they understood the need for caution. They had learned to hide and protect themselves. Daniel admired their strength. He also felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. He knew that he was not just protecting his own life now. He was protecting theirs too. That afternoon, a group of men arrived. They were not friendly. They looked like they had been traveling for a long time. Their faces were stern and their eyes were sharp. Daniel recognized them as neighbors from the nearby settlement. They had heard rumors of strangers on his land, and they had come to see for themselves. The leader of the group stepped forward and spoke loudly. "Daniel," he said, "we heard there are 5 Apache women living on your ranch. Is that true?" Daniel stood tall, trying to keep his voice calm. "Yes," he said. "They are here. They need shelter." The man's face tightened. "You know the rules," he said. "We don't accept outsiders. We don't want trouble." Daniel felt his hands tighten at his sides. He had expected this. He had also expected that he might need to defend his decision. But he did not want to fight. He did not want to cause more pain. He only wanted to keep the women safe. "These women are not here to cause trouble," Daniel said. "They are refugees. They have lost their homes. They need help." The men looked at each other. One of them spoke. "We don't trust them. We don't know what they want. They might bring danger." Daniel took a deep breath. "They are not dangerous," he said firmly. "They are just trying to survive." The leader of the men laughed softly, a sound that felt cruel. "Survive?" he said. "This is our land. We don't want strangers here. You need to send them away." Daniel's heart pounded. He knew that if he refused, things could become difficult. People could decide to cause trouble. But he could not send them away. He had already seen the pain in their eyes. He had seen the strength in their hands. He had seen their quiet dignity. He could not turn his back on them now. "I can't do that," Daniel said. "They are staying." The men stared at him. The leader's face grew angry. "Then you will face the consequences," he said. Daniel stood firm. "I will face them," he replied. The men did not like his answer. They turned away and left, but Daniel could feel the tension in the air. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The women were watching from inside the cabin. Their faces were pale, but they did not look frightened. They looked determined. They had survived worse. Daniel felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. That night, Daniel sat by the fire with the women. He could feel their eyes on him. He knew they were wondering what would happen next. He decided to speak honestly. "They don't like you here," he said. "They want you gone." The tallest woman nodded. "We expected this," she said. "We have lived with this before." Daniel looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know it would be like this." The woman smiled slightly. "It is not your fault," she said. "You are kind. You are different." Daniel felt a warm feeling in his chest. "I will protect you," he said again, "no matter what." The women looked at each other, and the older woman spoke softly. "We will help too," she said. "We are not helpless." Daniel nodded. He had not expected them to offer help in this way, but he knew it was true. They had survived by being strong. They were not asking to be saved. They were asking to be respected. In the following days, the ranch changed again. Daniel and the women worked together, not just to maintain the land, but to prepare for what might come. They strengthened the fences. They stored extra food. They planned for emergencies. They did not want to be caught off guard. Daniel also began to talk to the women more, learning about their lives, their traditions, their hopes. He realized that they were not just victims. They were people with dreams, with memories, with skills. They had stories to share. They had wisdom, and Daniel felt honored to listen. One evening, the younger woman, who had seemed scared before, spoke up. She looked at Daniel with a small, brave smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting us stay." Daniel felt his eyes sting. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm the one who should thank you." The woman looked surprised. "Why?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "Because you have taught me something," he said. "You have shown me that life is not only about surviving. It is also about caring, about helping each other." The women nodded. They understood. They had not come to the ranch only for shelter. They had also come to find a place where they could be seen as human beings again. They had come to find kindness. As the days passed, the women began to feel more comfortable. They laughed more. They shared stories. They sang quietly at night. Their songs were beautiful, and Daniel found himself listening with respect. The songs were not loud or noisy. They were gentle and full of emotion. They spoke of family, of the land, of memories. Daniel realized that his life was changing. He had always believed that he was alone by choice, but now he understood that he had been alone because he had never allowed himself to trust others. The women had changed that. They had brought warmth to his home. They had brought meaning to his days. However, the threat from the neighbors remained. Daniel knew that he could not ignore it. He had to be ready for anything. But he also knew that he could not back down. He had made a choice, and he had to stand by it. One morning, Daniel woke up to find that the women had been working on the garden all night. They had planted new seeds and watered the soil. They had also built a small fence around the garden to protect it from animals. Daniel felt moved by their hard work. He walked outside and stood beside them. "You don't have to do this," he said. The oldest woman smiled. "We want to," she said. "We want to help. We want to feel useful." Daniel nodded. "You are useful," he said. "More than you know." The women continued their work, and Daniel watched them with a feeling of pride. They were not just surviving, they were rebuilding. They were creating a new life, even in a place that had once felt harsh and lonely. As the sun set, Daniel sat on the porch and looked out at the land. He thought about the men who had come and the challenges that still lay ahead. He thought about the women inside the cabin, working together, living together, healing together. He realized that his ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of life. He understood that he could not keep the women safe forever. The world outside was harsh, and people could be cruel. But he also understood that he would not give up. He would stand with them, no matter what. That night, the cabin was filled with quiet sounds. The women sang softly, and Daniel listened. He felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. He realized that his life had changed in a way he could never have imagined. The ranch was no longer just his. It was a place where 5 women had found hope and where a man had found his heart again. The ranch had changed so much that even the wind seemed different. It still blew across the open land, but now it carried the sound of life. The women had settled into a routine, and Daniel had begun to feel a deep sense of peace. But peace on the frontier was never safe for long. The world outside the ranch remained unpredictable, and the threat from the neighbors continued to grow. One day, as Daniel was fixing a fence near the pasture, He saw the men from the nearby settlement again. This time, they were not alone. They had brought more people with them. The group looked larger, and their faces were filled with anger. Daniel could tell that they had decided to take action. The leader of the group approached Daniel with a stern look. "You have until the end of the week," he said. "After that, we expect you to send the women away. This is not a place for them." Daniel stood his ground. "I told you before," he said calmly.
"They are staying." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You are making a mistake," he said.
"You will cause trouble for everyone." Daniel felt a chill run through him. He knew that the leader was not only threatening him, but also the women. He had to find a way to protect them without causing more harm. He could not fight everyone. He had to think of something else. That evening, he called the women together. They sat around the fire, their faces serious. Daniel could see that they were worried, but they were not afraid. Aha! They had learned to face danger before. They had survived worse. But they also knew that this was different. This was not a war. This was a conflict about fear and misunderstanding. "I have to tell you something," Daniel said. "The men from the settlement want you to leave. They gave me a deadline." The tallest woman looked at him calmly. "We expected this," she said. "They do not trust us." Daniel nodded. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I can't fight them. There are too many of them." The women looked at each other. Then the oldest woman spoke. "We do not want trouble," she said, "but we will not run again." Daniel felt his heart tighten. "What do you mean?" he asked. The older woman looked at him with steady eyes. "We have survived by running," she said. "We have learned to hide, but we cannot live like that forever. We need a place to belong. We need to stand for ourselves." Daniel listened carefully. He realized that she was right. If they left, they would be running again. They would never find peace. They would always be afraid. He had brought them shelter, but he could not give them a safe life if they were always hiding. The women began to speak, one by one. They did not talk about fighting or violence. They talked about respect, about communication, about showing the neighbors that they were not a threat. They wanted to prove that they were human beings, not strangers to fear. The younger woman spoke first. "We can show them we are not dangerous," she said. "We can help them. We can work. We can share." The strong woman nodded. "Yes," she said. "We can show them our skills. We can show them we are not here to cause trouble." Daniel looked at them with a new sense of admiration. They were not asking him to protect them alone. They were offering to stand with him. They were offering to be part of the community, even if the community did not accept them yet. "I have an idea," Daniel said. "Maybe we can invite the neighbors here. We can show them who you are. Maybe if they see you working, they will understand." The women looked at him. "Do you think they will come?" asked the tallest woman. Daniel shrugged. "I don't know," he said, "but we have to try something. We cannot live in fear." The next day, Daniel rode into the settlement. His heart was heavy. He knew that he was taking a risk. He had never been good at talking to people. He was a quiet man, and he had always preferred to stay to himself. But now he had to speak for others. He had to stand up for what he believed was right. When he arrived, he found the same men who had threatened him. They were suspicious and cold. Daniel spoke to them honestly. He told them about the women, about their loss, about their need for shelter. He did not speak in anger. He spoke with calm honesty. "I am not asking you to love them," he said. "I am only asking you to give them a chance. They are human beings. They have suffered. They are not here to cause harm." The men listened, but their faces did not change. The leader shook his head. "We don't trust them," he said. "We don't want them here." Daniel sighed. He knew that changing their minds would not be easy. He asked one question that he hoped would reach them. "What would you do if it were your family?" he asked. "What if your wife and children were in danger and needed shelter? Would you turn them away?" The men looked at each other. No one answered. Daniel could see that they were thinking, but their pride and fear were strong. They did not want to admit that they might be wrong. Daniel returned to the ranch feeling tired. He knew that he had tried his best, but the neighbors were not ready. He also knew that he could not give up. The women needed him. They had trusted him. He could not fail them now. When he arrived, the women were waiting. They could see the sadness in his face. "What happened?" the tallest woman asked. Daniel sat down by the fire and told them what he had tried. He told them about the conversation with the neighbors and how they still refused to accept them. The women listened quietly. Daniel expected anger or sadness, but instead, he saw determination. "We will show them," said the strong woman. "We will show them we are not dangerous." The women began to plan. They decided to host a small gathering at the ranch. They would invite the neighbors, not as guests, but as visitors. They would show them the work they had done, the garden, the animals, the cabin. They would share food. They would speak respectfully. They would let the neighbors see that they were ordinary people. Daniel helped them prepare. The women cooked, cleaned, and organized the ranch. They worked together with a calm focus, as if they were preparing for an important event. The cabin was cleaned, the garden was arranged, and the animals were cared for. Everything looked better than it had before. The ranch felt more like a home. When the day of the gathering arrived, Daniel waited nervously. He did not know if the neighbors would come. He did not know if they would accept the invitation, but he also knew that this was a moment of courage. The women were not just protecting themselves, they were standing for their dignity. Slowly, the neighbors arrived. Some came with suspicion, others with curiosity. They stood at the edge of the ranch, looking around. The women greeted them politely without fear. They offered food and water. They showed them the garden and the work they had done. They spoke in calm voices, explaining their lives and their needs. At first, the neighbors were quiet. They did not speak much, but as the day went on, something began to change. They saw how the women worked. They saw how the women cared for the land and the animals. They saw that the women were not a threat. They saw that they were simply people trying to survive. One neighbor spoke quietly to Daniel. "They are not what we thought," he said. "They are good people." Daniel felt a small sense of relief. It was not a complete victory, but it was a beginning. The neighbors were not fully convinced, but they were no longer angry. They were starting to see the truth. By the end of the day, the neighbors left without causing trouble. The women had shown courage and respect. Daniel felt proud of them. He felt proud of himself, too, because he had stood by them. That night, the women sat around the fire, tired but calm. The youngest woman spoke softly. "Maybe this is the first step," she said. The oldest woman nodded. "Yes," she said. "We will keep trying. We will not give up." Daniel listened to them and felt his heart fill with respect. He realized that the women had not only saved themselves, they had saved him too. They had shown him that courage was not only about fighting, it was also about standing tall, speaking honestly, and showing kindness even when others did not understand. The ranch was still under threat, but the women had made a change. They had shown the neighbors that they were not dangerous. They had shown them that they were human, and in doing so, they had taken a step closer to peace. Daniel looked at the women and understood something important. He understood that the world could be changed, not only by force, but by patience and respect. He had always believed that survival meant being strong alone, but now he knew that survival also meant building trust, even when it was difficult. As the night grew dark, the women slept peacefully for the first time in a long while. Daniel sat outside and looked at the stars. He felt a sense of hope. He knew that the future was still uncertain, but he also knew that they were no longer alone. They were together, and that made all the difference. The days after the gathering were different. The neighbors did not act as openly hostile as before, but they were still distant. Some avoided the ranch completely, while others would glance toward it with curiosity. Daniel knew that trust would not come quickly. He also knew that the women had changed something important. They had shown the neighbors their true selves. That was a step forward, even if it was small. The women continued to work hard helping Daniel with the ranch. They planted more crops, repaired fences, and cared for the animals. They had grown stronger, not only in body but in spirit. The quiet sadness that had been in their eyes began to fade. It did not disappear completely because their loss was still there, but it became softer. It became part of their past instead of the only thing they could feel. Daniel watched them and felt a deep sense of pride. He had never imagined that his life would change like this. He had never imagined that he would feel responsible for 5 women, and that he would find meaning in helping them. He had never imagined that his quiet ranch would become a place of healing. One morning, the youngest woman came to Daniel with a small basket. She held it carefully, like it was something precious. "Daniel," she said softly, "I have something for you." Daniel took the basket and looked inside. There were small woven pieces made with skill and care. The colors were bright and the patterns were beautiful. He realized that they were gifts. The women had made them for him. He looked up at the young woman. "Thank you," he said. "This is beautiful." The woman smiled shyly. "We wanted to show our thanks," she said. "You gave us shelter. You gave us a chance." Daniel felt his eyes become wet. He had not expected this. He had not expected such kindness. He realized that he had not only helped them, they had also helped him in a way he had not understood before. "Your kindness means more than you know," he said. The young woman nodded. "We are not just survivors," she said. "We are people, and you helped us remember that." Daniel held the basket carefully. He knew he would keep it always. It was not just a gift. It was a symbol of what had happened on the ranch. It was a reminder of the bond that had formed between them. As time passed, the ranch began to feel more stable. The women grew more comfortable. They began to talk about the future. They spoke of their dreams, their hopes, and what they wanted to do next. Some wanted to stay on the ranch. Some wanted to move to a nearby town. Some wanted to travel. But they all agreed on one thing. They wanted to live with dignity. Daniel listened to them and felt a new kind of happiness. He realized that the women were not just living on his land. They were building lives. They were creating a future, and he was proud to be part of that. One day, the neighbors came again. This time, they did not come with anger. They came with curiosity. The leader of the group stood at the fence and looked at the women working in the garden. He did not speak at first. He watched quietly. Daniel walked over to him. "Hello," he said. The leader nodded. "I saw what you did," he said. "I saw how the women work. I see now that they are not a problem." Daniel felt surprised. He had not expected this. "Thank you," he said. The leader continued. "I still don't fully understand," he said, "but I respect your choice, and I respect them." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is enough," he said. "It is a start." The leader looked at the women and then back at Daniel. "If they need anything," he said, "I will not cause trouble." Daniel felt a sense of relief. It was not a complete acceptance, but it was progress. The world was not perfect, but it was becoming more fair. The women heard the conversation and looked at each other. They smiled softly. It was a small victory, but it meant a lot. They had not only survived, but they had also changed the minds of others. They had shown that kindness and respect could win over fear. As the months passed, life on the ranch became a new kind of normal. The women continued to help, and Daniel continued to care for them. The ranch became a place of work and peace. The quiet that once felt heavy was now a calm silence filled with meaning. One evening, Daniel sat on the porch with the women. They talked quietly about their memories and their dreams. The fire burned softly, and the stars filled the sky. Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had once thought that his life would always be lonely, but now he knew that loneliness was not the only choice. There was a different kind of life, a life with connection, with care, with purpose. The tallest woman spoke, her voice soft. "We have come far," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said, "you have." The oldest woman smiled. "We have found a place where we can be safe," she said. "And we have found a man who believed in us." Daniel felt his heart warm. "And I have found a family," he said. The women looked at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw something he had not seen before. He saw trust. He saw belonging. He saw a future that was not only about surviving, but about living. The next morning, the women gathered their belongings. Some were leaving, and some were staying. The air was filled with a quiet sadness, but also with hope. They had been through so much together, and now their paths were changing. It was not goodbye forever, but it was a moment of change. The youngest woman hugged Daniel gently. "Thank you," she said again. Daniel hugged her back. "Thank you," he replied, "for everything." The women left with dignity, walking into the distance with their heads held high. Daniel watched them go, feeling a mix of sadness and pride. He knew that they were not just leaving his ranch, they were leaving behind the pain of the past. They were stepping into a new life. As the last of the women disappeared over the horizon, Daniel stood alone on the ranch once more. But this time, the loneliness felt different. It was not empty. It was calm. It was filled with memories, with love, with lessons learned. Daniel walked back into his cabin and looked at the woven basket. He placed it on the table, where he could see it every day. It was a reminder of the time when 5 widows knocked on his door and changed his life forever. He knew that his life would never be the same again. The ranch would always hold the memory of the women who had come and stayed, even if only for a short time. He had been a quiet man living alone, but now he understood that his life had meaning beyond his own needs. He had learned that kindness could change the world, even in small ways. The sun set over the hills, and the wind whispered across the land. Daniel stood on the porch and watched the sky turn dark. He felt peace in his heart. He knew that the world would continue to be harsh at times, but he also knew that hope was real. And so the rancher who once lived alone found a new life through the strength of 5 women. Their stories had become part of his story, and his kindness had become part of theirs. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of healing, a place of courage. and a place where the power of human connection had made all the difference.